The crane was already halfway into the air when I heard the sirens. Not the emergency kind, but the HOA kind. That strange hybrid of golf cart and power trip rolled up, and out came Karen, clipboard in hand, her heels somehow louder than the machine she came to stop. "You can't operate heavy equipment in a residential zone without approval," she announced like a town crier, eyes scanning the construction site like she was looking for a reason to sue someone. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just reached into my vest, pulled out the laminated permit, and held it up like a priest with a crucifix. But she didn't flinch. "This doesn't matter," she snapped. "It's still violating the noise ordinance." That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was personal. Let me rewind. 3 weeks ago, a tornado tore through the west end of our town. The kind of storm that doesn't leave much behind. Roofs gone. Power poles snapped. A school gym collapsed like a house of cards. And the shelter we had relied on for years? Obliterated. Concrete cracked wide open like paper. That same night I got a call. Not from my neighbors. Not from the HOA. But from City Hall. "We need help rebuilding the shelter," they said. "Can you coordinate equipment? Maybe donate time? We've got a tight window before storm season hits again." Of course, I said yes. My dad built half this town with that same crane. I learned to operate it before I could drive. It's not just a machine, it's a legacy. So I put the word out. Volunteers showed up. We cleared debris, poured foundation, got structural engineers involved. Local welders offered to reinforce the steel beams at cost. The new shelter wasn't just going to be functional. It was going to be safe enough to outlast whatever the sky threw next. But Karen saw a crane. That morning, I'd been operating since 6 a.m. The permit allowed it. I checked with the city, cleared it with the emergency task force. Everything above board. But Karen's HOA kingdom doesn't care about city permits. Cares about control, about optics. And somehow, a bright yellow crane poking into the sky was more threatening than the fact that last month's tornado nearly took out 3 city blocks. I lowered the machine slowly, not because she told me to, but because I didn't want this scene to escalate in front of the volunteers. They were mostly retirees, kids from the high school welding program, and a couple of dads who'd taken the week off work just to help. They didn't need to see another adult meltdown. Karen stormed off without another word. That was the first day she filed a complaint. I thought it would end there. One power trip, one tantrum, and maybe she'd find a new hobby. But the next morning, the HOA issued a cease and desist. That's when I knew it wasn't just Karen. Something bigger was happening. And they weren't going to stop with paperwork. They wanted to shut us down completely. The cease and desist letter came hand-delivered by a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Cold War. His HOA badge was clipped to his shirt pocket like it was a federal ID, and he handed me the envelope like it was a subpoena. "We'll expect all activity to halt immediately," he said, monotone. "You do realize this is an emergency public works site?" I asked, trying not to let my voice rise. "I don't make the decisions. I deliver the messages." He turned on his heel and walked off like a wannabe marshal from an old western, leaving behind silence that felt louder than any crane. I opened the envelope and read the letter out loud, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "The HOA board has determined that the use of industrial machinery within the boundaries of Whispering Pines violates Article 14, Section 3, Nuisance and Disturbance Clause. Failure to cease construction will result in fines, legal escalation, and possible civil penalties." It was signed by Karen herself, full name, underlined in blue ink. She had even drawn a little star next to her signature. They were serious. I gathered the team inside the half-finished shelter. It was nothing but concrete flooring and steel skeleton at that point, but we had made progress. The town had donated emergency cots, food bins, and air filtration units. A mural was planned for the entrance, painted by local kids to make the space feel less like a bunker and more like a sanctuary. But now all of that was at risk. I stood in front of them and told them the truth. "We've been hit with a cease and desist from the HO. It's not legally binding on municipal projects, but they're threatening to escalate." "Escalate how?" one of the welders asked. wiping sweat from his brow. Fines, lawsuits, maybe even police. A retired firefighter named Hank raised his hand. Let M. I didn't survive 23 years of pulling people out of wreckage to stop because of some woman who thinks clipboards are weapons. Everyone chuckled, but I could tell the tension was rising. Not everyone was ready to fight. Not everyone had the energy. That night I stayed late at the site. I walked the perimeter, inspected the materials, checked the generator. That's when I heard a metallic clink behind me. I turned. Nothing. Then another sound. Hissing. I ran to the side of the generator trailer. Someone had sliced the fuel line. Gas was pooling on the ground. Karen didn't just want us shut down. Someone had taken it further. Sabotage. The town's only active emergency project was now a fire hazard. I called the police. Filed the report. They wrote it up, promised to look into it. But I could tell by their faces they didn't want to touch anything involving the HOA. We've had complaints from both sides, one officer said, avoiding eye contact. Both sides? I'm trying to build a tornado shelter. She's trying to shut it down because the crane is too loud before brunch. I was starting to see the pattern. Karen wasn't just acting alone. She was weaponizing the system. The next morning, I showed up to the site at 5:30 a.m. Only this time, the entrance was blocked, with 3 HOA trucks parked across the dirt access road. Signs in the windows read, "Construction suspended by community order. Violators will be prosecuted." But what Karen didn't know was that I'd made a few calls the night before. City Hall, the mayor, and even a local reporter who owed me a favor from last year's flooding coverage. By 7 a.m., the first news van pulled up. By 7:30, the mayor arrived in a hard hat and boots. And by 8 a.m., Karen's blockade was on live television. The HOA trucks didn't move when the news van rolled in. If anything, they doubled down, hazard lights blinking like it was some kind of high-security operation. Karen stood dead center in front of them, arms crossed, hair helmeted into perfect submission. She wasn't rattled. She was ready for her close-up. A young reporter from Channel 8 stepped out of the van. I recognized her, Jasmine Gwynn, fresh out of journalism school but tenacious as they come. She wore sneakers and a blazer, already mic'd up, holding a notepad and a fire in her eyes. I walked up to her. "You want the short version or the truth? Give me the version that'll make people mad enough to watch it twice." I smiled. "You're in the right place." Jasmine interviewed me first. I told her everything, the tornado, the destroyed shelter, the city's request for help, the permits, the sabotage. Then I stepped back and let the camera roll as she turned to Karen. Karen didn't blink. "This is about peace and order," she said with a tight smile. "We have bylaws for a reason. No one is above them, not even someone with a crane and a martyr complex. But this project is for tornado safety," Jasmine pressed. "And it's officially endorsed by the city. Are you saying the HOA's rules override municipal authority?" "I'm saying that every citizen is responsible for following the rules they agreed to when they moved into this neighborhood. If we start allowing chaos, where does it stop?" I watched the interview from 10 feet away, jaw tightening. Chaos? This wasn't chaos. It was survival. It was a community taking care of itself when bureaucracy moved too slow. But for Karen, anything outside her control was chaos. When the interview aired that night, it blew up. Not just locally, nationally. Comments flooded in. People furious. Volunteers doubled. Donations poured in. But the next morning, Karen escalated. She showed up with a private security company. Men in matching polos and mirrored sunglasses, armed with clipboards and GoPros. She claimed the project zone was a public hazard and needed enforcement observation. They circled the site like mall cops on steroids, filming everything, citing violations like open water bottles, unattended toolboxes, and a folding chair left in the sun. The absurdity was unbearable, but effective. Volunteers started backing out. Not everyone wanted to be on camera. Not everyone wanted a lawsuit threat. It was working. Her pressure campaign, her manufactured panic, it was grinding us down. I called City Hall again. They reassured me support was still in place. But politics had crept in. Officials were reevaluating timelines, pausing additional permits. Translation: Karen had friends, and those friends were whispering in ears that mattered. I was losing ground. And then, just as I thought things couldn't twist further, one of the volunteers, a high school senior named Malik, came running up with his phone. "Dude, check this out," he panted. "Karen's HOA site just published this." I looked. There it was. A blog post titled, "The Crane Menace: How One Man is Endangering Whispering Pines." It had photos of me, of the volunteers, of the mayor, blurred faces but recognizable. She'd spun the story to make us look like extremists, dangerous, unregulated, even militant. There were claims of unauthorized surveillance, environmental damage, and possible ties to anarchist groups. It was pure fiction, but it was working. People were scared, confused, distracted, and then my phone buzzed again. This time it was the city. "We're issuing a temporary stop work order. Just until this is sorted." That's when I knew. She had won a round. But not the fight. That night, I sat alone in the hollow frame of the shelter, wind pushing through the steel ribs. I looked up at the sky, same sky that had ripped this town apart 3 weeks ago, and I made a decision. If they wanted a war of perception, I'd give them a reality check. Because tomorrow, the storm sirens would be tested, and this town would remember why we needed this place. At exactly 10 a.m., the sky over Whispering Pines howled. Not thunder, not wind, sirens. The city's monthly tornado siren test had arrived. An eerie, rising wail that vibrated through the pavement, rattled windows, and summoned every memory of that devastating storm 3 weeks prior. I stood outside the half-finished shelter, boots planted in the red dirt, staring at the horizon. Around me, volunteers paused, hands shielding eyes as they scanned the skies like old instincts had kicked in. Even the birds went quiet. It was just a test. But no one could forget what happened last time. Children had hidden in bathtubs. Seniors had crowded into grocery store freezers. One family spent 6 hours trapped under a collapsed porch swing. 2 blocks of houses gone in minutes. This shelter wasn't just a building. It was a scar turned into armor. As the siren faded into a haunting echo, people began to arrive. First a couple moms with kids on their hips. Then a group from the retirement village down the road. Then the pastor from the First Baptist Church, still wearing paint-splattered jeans. Soon, a line of cars curved down the street toward our site. They didn't come for a protest. They didn't come for drama. They came to see why we were building this. I took out a megaphone from the back of my truck and stood on a crate. I know many of you are confused. You've seen the news. You've read the HOA statements. Maybe you've even gotten one of Karen's flyers in your mailbox. So let me clear this up once and for all. I turned to the steel bones of the shelter behind me. This isn't just a project. This is a promise. That when the next storm comes, and it will come, you won't be alone. Your family will have a place to go. Your neighbors will have a place to wait it out. And your kids will be safe. Not because of me, because of you. Because this shelter is being built by the people for the people. And I don't care how many fines they file. I'm not stopping. The crowd clapped. Then something unexpected happened. Karen showed up. She pulled up in her spotless white crossover, stepped out in heels far too impractical for gravel, and walked straight through the gathering like Moses parting the Red Sea, except the sea looked disgusted. "Do not be fooled by theatrics," she shouted. "This is a clear violation of our community standards. It's an unsanctioned structure, and no amount of propaganda changes that." Someone near the front muttered, "She brought this drama on herself." Karen heard. Her face twitched. "This shelter," she pointed like it was on fire, "is a liability. It's built with unlicensed labor. It's not up to code. And I will personally hold every one of you accountable when, not if, something goes wrong." And then, as if fate was eavesdropping, the clouds shifted. Gray fingers stretched across the sky. The wind kicked up in gusts. Leaves spiraled into the air. And a low rumble rolled in from the west like a warning growl from the earth itself. Phones buzzed, one after another. Tornado watch issued for Jackson County. Conditions favorable. A collective hush fell. Karen turned pale. No one moved. Then, slowly, a child reached up and took her mother's hand. People turned toward the shelter. We weren't finished. We didn't have doors yet, or the full HVAC system, but we had thick walls, steel supports, reinforced beams, and enough room. Without waiting for permission, people started moving, calmly, intentionally, into the shelter. Karen stood frozen in place, like the ground had betrayed her. I looked at her one last time and said, "You can come in too." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The sky would. The wind didn't knock politely. It hit like a hammer. The first gust sent dust spiraling across the gravel, lifting lawn chairs, flipping traffic cones. A second wave snapped branches like matchsticks. The sky turned that unnatural, bruise-colored gray that Midwesterners know too well, the kind that makes every instinct scream underground. Now, inside the shelter, we rushed to secure what we could. The doors hadn't been installed yet, so we rigged sheets of plywood across the openings and braced them with sandbags and cinder blocks. Was it perfect? No, but it was safer than any garage, any hallway, any flimsy crawl space this neighborhood had. I counted heads as people poured in 60, 70, then close to 100. Elderly couples, mothers, kids in pajamas, some holding pets. One man carried a violin case like it was made of glass. Karen was still outside. She stood near her car, paralyzed, holding her phone like it was a life raft. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands as she fumbled to get in, but it was too late. The sirens were blaring again. This time, not a test. This time, real. I ran toward her, coat whipping around my legs. "Karen, you can't stay out here." She didn't look at me. Her mouth moved, but the wind swallowed her words. "Karen." She turned, finally, eyes wide with something new, uncertainty. The storm didn't care about bylaws, didn't care about order. It was bigger than all of us. She took a step, then another. By the time I reached her, she was shaking. "I didn't think it would actually come," she whispered, as if saying it too loud might summon it faster. "It always comes," I said, taking her arm and guiding her toward the shelter. "That's why we built this." We got inside just as the first debris hit the walls, branches, siding, maybe pieces of fences. The plywood groaned, but held. And inside, silence. Not from the storm, but from us. That kind of quiet only fear can create. We sat shoulder to shoulder, generations crammed into one space, breathing the same stale air, praying the same silent prayers. Karen sat on a folding chair, hugging her knees, eyes darting every time the steel above us moaned. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. The storm passed in 17 minutes. That's all it took. 17 minutes to remind everyone what really mattered. When we stepped outside, the neighborhood was bruised, but standing. A few trees down, a couple shingles missing, a cracked windshield here and there, but not one person hurt, and no one homeless. The shelter had done its job. News vans returned. City Hall representatives arrived. This time they brought coffee and contractors instead of paperwork. A crew of engineers inspected the structure, gave it an A+. The mayor personally approved continued work and promised full funding by Monday. Karen tried to speak to a reporter, but no one gave her the microphone. The next day, I found a note slipped under the door of my trailer. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. Thank you for not leaving me out there." Underneath it, K. We didn't become friends after that, but we didn't become enemies either. The shelter got finished 2 weeks later. Painted murals, bunk cots, medical kits, flashlights bolted to the walls, and one small plaque by the door. This place exists because people remembered that storms don't follow rules, and saving lives is louder than paperwork.